Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Teaching and Learning in the Early Years event. Obviously, ordinarily, we would love to have had you here and welcomed you in the school building, but for the second year running, we are running this event as a virtual one. And there are merits to that, because hopefully you're sat at home on your sofa with a glass of wine, so I'm sure there are some merits to that. Tonight's event is really around the teaching and learning, and we're not really touching so much on the pastoral and wellbeing, which will be covered completely in next week's event, which is the 17th, and Miss Stewart will be leading on that. So we thought, actually, so that you had a varied group of people presenting to you, I would present on the teaching and learning, and Miss Stewart will present on the personal, social and the wellbeing next week, and that will but both offer both boys and girls. So please do make sure that if you want to ask a question this evening, that you are using the chat function. Try not to leave it until the last minute, because sometimes those questions get fall off the back of the event. So if you can just, as you go, feel free to post the questions. We have Mrs. Stockdale online who will be able to field some of those questions, and Miss Stewart and myself are here if there's anything specific at the end of the session that you'd like to ask us. So without further ado, I will move on to this urban myth that happens around EYFS. EYFS means Early Years Foundation Stage, and it's reception, where you think that you are handing your little toddler over, and that's exactly what you are doing. Actually, they are pretty much at the end of that toddler stage when they join us, and it's incredible what they achieve in that 12 months. Just amazing. However, you ask great granny or auntie or uncle what they think a 4-year-old does at school, and in fact not really just great auntie and uncles, and they'll say, oh, they just play, don't they? Don't they just pootle around and have a little play with each other? Well, that's absolutely an urban myth. That does not happen. Of course they play, but actually there's a whole lot more that goes on than playing. And one of the areas tonight to discuss, and lots of you will already be aware of the Early Years Foundation Stage, because your children will be at nursery and they'll be following those stepping stones and those age brackets that go all the way through from birth to 5. So that's exactly what the EYFS is. It's a birth to 5 statutory curriculum. And so whether you're in the independent sector or the state, you always follow that EYFS curriculum. How we do it here at Surbiton is that we do exactly that, the statutory aspect, and we enhance in that in the English and maths in a way that you would expect us to do. You'll see as you go through that you'll see some of the pictures from the boys and the girls and the environment that they're within. The first slide talks about the enabling environment, and the reason for that is that actually we have a really rich environment. It's very, you can see some of the things there that are up from the classrooms in reception at the boys and at the girls. They're rich learning opportunities, and they're open to them both in terms of a self-select option, but also in terms of that more formal teaching aspect. One of the aspects of the Early Years Foundation Stage is about the characteristics of effective learning, and the characteristics of effective learning are very much about the work ethic, how your learning habits develop, and we work really hard on that right from the start. So set the scene that learning's fun, they have a passion for learning, and that actually learning's all around them, both in their play and in their more structured work. You'll see that there's lots of cues there around the room, so it might be that they're just learning how to write, and there'll be some cues of how to help them put those phonics together, those digraphs together to make whole words. It might be that it's number focused. Some children want to have that stimulus of those cues around them and that concrete piece of equipment that they can see. You can see the pebbles on the left-hand photo there, so that they've got the number that they can actually rationalise and see for their very eyes, and then they can use that responsibly, and they are taking responsibility for their own learning in that way. So the environment's really important. It's really important that you have that opportunity for them to be able to extend their learning through a rolling day. So they'll have their English and their maths lesson, but they may well be able to experience their maths through another activity in the afternoon, which consolidates that learning. Those areas of learning goals that we have to judge against at the end of this academic year, there's 17 of them. So there's quite a lot of work that goes on in that time. And the first one is communication and language. And obviously the obvious is there. You can see the girls in the centre there communicating. This is in COVID times, and we were so keen for the buddies to get together, the reception and year 6 buddies, that they actually met in the playground facing each other 2 meters apart and read stories to each other. And that is one of the aspects of communication and language that's so vital at this stage. The girls, the reception girls, were absolutely fixated in the same way that the boys were when their buddies came over. It's so important that you get that right from the start. And one of the things that I often talk to parents about when they say, what do we need to do in terms of preparing our child for school? One of the things that I constantly talk to them about, and as does Miss Stewart, is speak to them, give them a running commentary. Oh, look, we've just walked past your school. I wonder how we'll get there. Will we go on the bus? Oh, that bus comes here, doesn't it? All of that constant commentary on your life helps them to build their communication and language skills. Communication and language was one of the things that really in the last kind of 5 to 10 years has seen a bit of a dip coming into reception, and we've worked really hard on making sure that we pick that up very much so through group chatting, through listening and attention, focusing, listening and understanding, primarily because, whether we like it or not, those games that you may well have played in the car for that 4-hour journey to see Granny in Scotland, or that's wishful thinking that is 4 hours, where you might have played I Spy or Kim's Game or the memory game or the shopping game, probably children are either listening to stories or audio stories, or perhaps watching something on the iPad. And that art of speaking, that listening, attention and understanding is less so. So we use those opportunities as much as we can to get the children to share their thoughts, and you can see quite a lot of that happening in there. Speaking, listening, attention and understanding are the key, one of the prime areas in EYFS, and one of the ones that we judge against very early on. And some children are it's incredible how far they develop in these areas throughout the time that they're with us. The next area is personal, social and emotional, and you've probably heard quite a lot about this. It's interesting, this has changed. There's a new framework this year, and it has changed ever so slightly, and one of them is self-regulation. So managing yourself, building relationships and self-regulation. You'll see from the self-regulation, there's a photo on the bottom right hand corner there of how do you feel, and we talk about those zones of regulation. How are you feeling today? It's okay to feel not great, or it's okay to feel that I'm in the green zone, or actually I'm in the red zone and I really need to get myself out of it, so I'm going to remove myself from this event or this activity. Just allowing them to start to regulate their own emotions, managing themselves. It's hilarious today. I laughed with one of the year 2 boys who said to me, I said to them, take your ties off today because it was so hot. Take your ties off. And one of them came up to me and he said, oh, Mrs. Chong, don't really know how to take my tie off. So I helped him take his tie off. I said, oh, now what you're going to tell me is you can't undo your top button, can you? And he said, no, I don't think I can. Only to find out that actually it was a Velcro shirt, and he was very capable of actually undoing the button. But it is interesting. We have put in lots of things over the years, you know, the clothing stores, the shoes, the Velcro shoes. People have put mechanisms in place over the years to slightly de-skill them from being able to manage them themselves. So we quite often find coming into reception that eating with a knife and fork is quite unusual, and that maybe they've used fingers a lot of the time. So that's the managing self, and that's what we would look at, how they manage their own belongings and how they become responsible for other people's. Self-regulation, as I say, is about their own humour and how they are feeling, and building relationships is obviously crucial, and that's what we build our whole May Love Always Lead Us, which is our motto, is an absolutely brilliant grounding for that building relationship. So we work really hard on that, and you saw that with the girls and the buddying. You can see that there again with those, that this is another event where the buddies got together in the girls' playground, and they were actually doing little shows to each other, opposite each other. And the little girl in the centre here, dressed up for World Language Day, explaining to everybody why she was wearing what she was wearing, and having that sense of pride about what she was doing. All of those opportunities are giving them that confidence which they need. The next area is physical development. Physical development is really crucial to us here. We work really hard on making sure that the children from 4 to 11 have that skills progression that they so require in both gross motor skills and fine motor skills. It's incredible, and one of the areas that I quite often touch on with the physical development point of view is if your child hasn't crawled or hasn't perhaps used both hands or moved with both feet, or perhaps learnt to cycle or use a balance bike, often that gross motor skill affects and impacts the fine motor. So we do as much as we can. What you'll see in the reception classes is lots of tools, and you can see some of the children there, the girls using the pin, I can't even remember what they're called, the pin boards, and you can see them actually using the pencils for their writing. Will have particular grips for them. Some of them need that. If you think about their hand development, obviously that muscle development in your hand actually doesn't really develop properly until they're about 6, and we're actually asking them to do things with that. So that exercise is really vital. And as you can see, the gross motor skills is something that we pride ourselves on here. We have an amazing site at Hinchley Wood, as you will know, where the children can just use that gross motor skill to the very best, and you can see those girls in full swing and the boys in their race too. We do all of our game sessions, and some of our PE sessions are based at school in the gym, but actually we try to get to Hinchley Wood as much as we possibly can in order to do that. One of the aspects of physical development that often is lacking as the children come into reception is that opportunity to use their own body safely. So be able to sense risk around what they do with their body, climbing a tree, balancing on a step, balancing on the escalator. How many times has your child actually stood on the moving escalator as it goes up and they're still standing on that tippy edge, and you think, why are you doing that? Just put your whole foot forward. It's about that sense of risk in your physical development. So important for them at this point, and we're very cautious. If you think about your childhood as opposed to your child's childhood, you possibly would have been going off to neighbours, running around, being able to go out of the house and say to your parents, right, I'll be back in an hour or so. As they get a little bit older, we don't allow our children to have that same risk anymore, and for very good reasons. But actually, it's still quite important to allow them that opportunity, which is why our learning outside the classroom opportunity at Hinchley Wood is so vital. And we work really hard with the boys and the girls on that. The next aspect, which you might well have thought fell into the communication and language, is actually the literacy. This is all to do with that learning to read, and let's take ourselves back. We all remember that very first stage of when we were learning to read, and quite a few of us, well, maybe some of you may remember the 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and you did all the Ladybird books, and you went up and then you got to the 12s and you knew you'd made it. You were actually at the top end of that reading scheme. Well, reading schemes do still exist, absolutely, of course they do, and books are benchmarked in difficulty level for the children. But you can see here, actually, there's a whole wealth of learning that goes on behind that literacy. The word comprehension to most of us would resonate with us sitting in front of a text and answering copious amounts of questions, and our teachers saying to us, make sure it's a full sentence, make sure it's got a full stop, make sure it's got a capital letter. And yes, we do some of that sometimes, but actually comprehension is also about understanding your reading. So it can be a visual clue. So you can look at a big poster and we may say to them, what kind of weather do you think it is? And they're looking at the girl with the red anorak on, knowing full well it's rainy, and then starting to make sense of their context, their language context around them. We use the phonics sits alongside that. So the phonics is the kind of mechanical aspect of decoding, so where you learn your initial sounds and then you blend them together in digraphs and trigraphs, so they start to recognise those in whole words. Some children rely quite heavily on the phonics decoding, and some children actually go straight for whole word recognition, and quite often will look at the shape of the word. And that early learning goal is very much around being able to read signs around them and to be able to recognise CVC words as they go. And you can see we do have lots of opportunities there. The girls here in this photograph are doing our Read Write Ink focus story here in small groups. We try to work in the phonics aspect. We work in very small groups so they're all getting an opportunity to build on their phonics at their own level. And they are at varying degrees at that stage. And please do not panic if your child has not been interested in a letter. It's fine. They absolutely will be by the time they've had a couple of months at school and have really enjoyed that learning. Children do developmental stages when they're good and ready on the whole, and we can enable them, but we will not be forcing them. And the next one, which falls under the literacy, is of course writing. And of course the fine motor skills and the physical development impact this quite a lot. We look at that handwriting focus, but we also look at that creativity. So the creativity is really important. And when you're reading a book and you're perhaps on the 55th version of the Gruffalo, going through the Gruffalo and letting the children see that at the beginning of the story, did you notice that there was a woodpecker in the tree and the woodpecker comes back at the end of the story? That's good, isn't it? How the start of the story starts with a character and it ends with that same character. You're starting to build for them an opportunity for their own writing and their own creativity. They quite often have amazing ideas, children, but find it very difficult to sequence them and to pitch them into a story. And actually you can give them that through picture books by telling them, oh, actually this is a beginning, it's introducing the person here, isn't it? And we know we're in the deep dark wood, and we know there's definitely probably going to be a Gruffalo coming along soon, and you're starting to make that context really come alive for them. Really helps with their writing, and the handwriting comes as their fine motor skills develop. And sometimes, as I say, that is not as quick as you'd always think it should be, but it comes in time. The next aspect is the maths. And funnily enough, the new framework has changed quite significantly in the maths. So the number and the numerical patterns are all very much geared towards a sort of coding and a mastery of maths. So the number is, it used to be that you would be very confident with numbers 1 to 20 and you'd be able to count. Now they're actually wanting you to be able to use those numbers within 20 and actually have those number families accurate. And you can see one of the boys here is using his number knowledge. He's actually using that concrete aid there, and as is the boy at the top with the Numicon, using the colours there to make the patterns and realise that everything comes in patterns. And Matthew in the bottom corner here is using his number bomb facts, so he knows 6 + 4 is 10, and he's writing his sums down because he's done that sum in his concrete, and as much of that play. The girls at the bottom are working on patterns as well and creating repeating patterns and making sure that they're working in 2s, or they'll be sequencing in 3s. It's all an awareness that actually eventually once that, and that's where people see it as through play, and actually a lot of the time it's just absolutely immersing their brain into that seeing in patterns, seeing in numbers, which helps them much further down the line. We move on to understanding the world, and I always thought when parents saw, oh my goodness, there's two aspects here that we have to, our children are gauged against by the end of the year, and oh my goodness, I'm not sure they know about all of these things. And actually it's much more simple and straightforward than you think. The understanding of the world is very much around these three aspects: understanding past and present. And I always think with children of 4, the past is yesterday. And actually talking to them about toys from the past and getting the Victorian box out with the spinning sticks and the unicycle is not helping them understand the past. And actually it's just about their sense of time, and we work a lot with them, probably mostly orally at that point, to understand that, oh, that happened to us yesterday, didn't it? Oh, and then last year you went on holiday, didn't you, to Cornwall? And then this year, this is what we're doing. So that they start to understand that past and present. The natural world has never been I have never in all my time of teaching been teaching at a time when the natural world is so key for them, and they are so incredibly talented at this very domain specific language around the natural world. They come in to reception with knowledge of all things under the sea, or dinosaurs, or mystical creatures. They have the most incredible domain specific knowledge around this, and we just build on that. So lots of the work in reception will be around growing things, or there's a topic at the moment that we're doing which has been all around bees, wild and wonderful, and the girls certainly do the same with the butterflies and the caterpillars, and it's just allowing them that real sense of that scientific questioning to start to come into them. So you can see the past and present falls very much under the humanities, the natural world falls much more under the sciences, and the people, culture and communities is that kind of more human side of things. So actually understanding, well, I support Liverpool and you support Manchester United. Well, that's okay. We're okay to do that. We're just different, and but you support them, and I don't have to be the same as you just to be your friend. And understanding that actually on a Sunday I might sit down on a Sunday lunch and always have a roast. That's just a cultural thing, potentially. It's not anything more difficult than that. They don't, at the age of 4, need to understand every world religion or every race or culture. They don't need to do that, but they need to be understanding, and that May Love Always Lead Us has to come into that as well. We work really hard on them appreciating and understanding each other and each other's differences. And that's quite vital at that point, because if you think about it, their move from nursery into reception has been very much around egocentric play. So they've been very much focused on what they're playing with, not who they're playing with. And all of a sudden, we're asking them to work in groups and work together and build relationships. And that is their own culture and community developing before your very eyes. And it develops really very quickly. So it's much more simple and straightforward than it actually looks and is in your day-to-day living. The next one is expressive art and design, and that focuses on creating. And this is not about creating a replica Van Gogh. This is not about that at all, but it's about being expressive in your art and design focus. So that could be through drama or dance or music. It might be through creating with materials. You can see the girls here are having a whale of a time. Goodness knows what the cleaner thought after this day, because that tough tray box there is full of sand, and they were doing a story of Hand of Surprise there and replicating the story in the sand. Goodness knows what the floor looked like by the end, but they were having a whale of a time, and they were creating with materials that were around them. They were self-selecting, and they were being imaginative and expressive in doing so. And when they're doing that, it's really important that we give them that opportunity to talk through what they're doing. It's one of the areas that staff historically years ago thought, oh my goodness, I need to be really, really good at art to be able to teach this. No, this is much more about allowing them to think creatively. And let's be honest, in the world that we're moving into, the need to be creative thinking it couldn't be more important. They keep quoting us, and the percentage goes up and up, but they say that 65% of the jobs that our children will go into haven't even been created yet. And if that is true, there are a couple of things, as far as I'm concerned, and I think ties in really well with the EYFS, a couple of things that are absolutes. One, the need to communicate effectively will never die. It doesn't matter if a robot's taken over the role, we still need to discuss what we need that robot to do and what our end product needs to be. And the need to think creatively will be so vital, because thinking out of the box, yes, we can get all the information and the internet will be able to give us all that information, but it's what we do with it and how we use it and how reliable that source is that we start to teach them even from that really young age. So I hope I've given you a sort of slight whistle-stop tour of the early years curriculum. What we intend to do, and what happens over the period of a week, is you won't see that split into those lessons over a timetabled week. You will see phonics happen every day in both the boys and the girls, and you'll see English and maths happen every day. And then there's timetabled, more specialist subjects that are, we have specialist teachers for all the way through. We have PE specialists, music specialists, and modern foreign language specialists, and that they teach that through right the way through from 4 to 11. So that adds into that profile of those early learning goals. That's all from me in that whistle-stop tour. We have got documentation should you want to see those next stages. There's some really good what to expect when articles that have been sent out by the government on the new framework. If you would like any of that material before you start with us in September, please just do let us know and we will be able to point you in the right direction. In the meantime, has anybody got any questions around teaching and learning?
Hi, yes, thanks very much for that. We've got a couple of questions regarding maths and English just to start with. How do you teach phonics, which you've covered partly, but also what level do you expect children to be at when they start? And do you recommend any materials for parents to look at using prior to their child joining one of the schools?
I think I've touched slightly on that. I think it's really important that you don't force them down a line of doing anything that they don't particularly want to do, because actually once they're interested and engaged, they take off. So it's really important actually that you take the lead from them. They'll start to say, oh, that letter, that's the beginning of my name. Daddy, that book starts with my letter of my name. They'll start to have an understanding of that. And as they do that, then it's really good to start talking about the shapes of the letters, or perhaps what the beginning, and you know, I'm sure you are all aware, but we don't teach, so the names of the letters are the A, B, C, D, E, but actually they're taught in how they sound, and sometimes that's quite difficult, particularly if English is not your first language. And so there are so many apps out there. Phonemes is one of them. Phonics Play is another one, that actually you can hear the computer and they can play back themselves. There's a really good opportunity for you to be able to hear it and them to be able to hear it and to see it, but we don't expect any of that before they come to us. If they can hang their coat and they can get their bag and they can see their name, or at least see the picture that perhaps they chose with their name, that's great. And we wouldn't expect you to do any more than that, except a level of interest, which would be amazing. In terms of how we teach them maths, again, it's just about looking at those less mechanical aspects of maths, but just saying, well, actually, you've got more than me. You've got 3 sweets and I've only got 1 sweet. Just getting them to understand that actually what is a number, what is the value of that number, but we don't expect them to know anything in particular before they start. But there's lots and lots of information out there. One of the things that did happen that was brilliant that came out of online learning was the BBC Bite Size, which there is an awful lot of work out there to support their learning, but please do not feel that you should be doing that unless they absolutely want to.
Great, thank you. And I'll break this next question down slightly. So just staying with the English and maths, why is there so much of a focus on English and maths as a specifically? And is it because of statutory requirements or entrance tests for secondary and grammar schools?
So if I can just talk from the boys' perspective on that one, yes, of course, we have that exit strategy at 11 that all the boys have to leave us. But I think I would be right in saying, and Miss Stewart can correct me if I'm wrong, that we teach the same skill set all the way through, but we would expect, so the biggest difference is, so maths and English really comes into every other aspect of their learning. So whether they're doing history, geography, PRS, PSHCE, they will be using their English facts and knowledge. If they're doing their science, they'll be using their maths. So we expect to be able to expedite that somewhat in that reception year, simply because we're exposing them to it daily. And it is just that repetition of exposing them to it daily, really. So we're not expecting them to be at age 10 level by the time they've left reception, but they've certainly been given all the tools in order to think through that problem solving, the number crunch, understanding what the numbers look like, understanding what the letters look like. So really, it's not that maths, and we don't pride ourselves on maths and English being a driving force. We absolutely look at the holistic development of every child, and we're very much about that breadth of opportunity in all across the subjects. But we would, in terms of the EYFS and how it perhaps differs to perhaps a state setting, that is probably the biggest difference.
Great, thank you. And just a couple of questions here for Miss Stewart. Perhaps you could talk about across both schools in terms of the timetable. So beyond just maths and English, what does the timetable look like? And are things like music, PE, foreign languages, are they part of the everyday curriculum?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Good evening, everyone. As Mrs. Chong's explained, I think the beauty of the early years curriculum is that it's so broad and enriching and encompassing, and it really gives the children the opportunity to explore those areas that they're particularly passionate about. But we do build in that subject specialist model right from reception. So they do have a music lesson every week with music specialists. They have French with our French specialists, and then they have sport with our fantastic sports teams at both the boys and the girls prep. Those lessons are taught discreetly, but then a lot of the elements and skills that they cover in those sessions are then also pulled through understanding the world, or their creative, or wherever it might be that they're taking their learning. So yes, it's taught discreetly, but then it's also brought and threaded in really carefully by the early years experts, and they plan as a team. So the PE team know which areas of that physical development they need to be developing and sharing back. All of that's also then put onto Tapestry so that parents can also monitor that, and we can track the children's progress over the year.
Great, thank you. And similarly relating to the timetable, how often in a week do the children go down to Hinchley Wood in the first few years?
So it depends year on year. In reception, they go down for an entire morning or afternoon for learning outside the classroom. And that is, again, a discrete subject that's taught down in our Forest School at Hinchley Wood by the early years teachers and TAs. Some weeks it might have a science focus, other weeks it might have a creative arts focus. Sometimes they might be going on a Gruffalo hunt or a bear hunt. But they do that every single week, come rain or shine. No such thing as bad weather, just clothing. So we always make sure they're fully prepared and off they go. And then as the year progresses, they might start going up to Hinchley Wood a bit more frequently for sport as well, particularly as they build up towards their first ever sports day. And then in year 1 and year 2, they continue to go up there for lock, and they incorporate more sports sessions. So it's a facility that we're very, very lucky to have, and that we're able to utilise. But equally, we've got 2 beautiful outdoor areas at the boys' prep and at the girls' prep for the early years learning to continue outside. That's just for those children.
Great, thank you. And just moving on to foreign languages, could you just talk a little bit about when children start languages, what that looks like over the first few years, and what the selection of languages is?
Sure. So at the moment we start with French in both the boys and the girls prep, and then we take on Spanish from year 3, and they continue with French and Spanish through to the end of year 6. It's delivered by our linguist specialists, and we are also very lucky to be supported by teaching assistants who also deliver MFL. It starts off in a very child-friendly, child-centric way with songs and games, but really focusing on some of that core vocabulary, and that develops as they move through the school. We also incorporate our use of technology really effectively to bring some of that learning to life, so using apps like Puppet Pals, where they might put together short dialogues and narrate them in French and Spanish, and by the end of year 6 they're able to write at an age-related expectation in French and indeed Spanish, and we make sure that by the time they go into senior school they're really well prepared for that. We also support our children who speak English as an additional language through additional language acquisition sessions, but we do find that the children who join us in reception are the most adept and quick at picking up spoken English because it's such a language-rich environment.
Great, thank you. Just a quick note, we've only got a couple of more questions, so if anybody wants to put anything in the chat before we finish, please do. And this next question really for both of you, I suppose. The head of an overseas IB school told me that the UK is odd at starting school at 5, where they start properly at age 6. Do you have any views on the merits of either approach?
That is a brilliant question. And it's the first time I've been asked that question. And you're absolutely right. Different countries around the world start formal education at different times. And for those countries that don't start a formal education till 6 or 7, there is a far greater expectation that the children prior to that age do join a kindergarten or a nursery where they have already started education. It might just come under a slightly different guise. And what we're very lucky to be able to do as an independent school is have that autonomy over how we bring out the best parts of an early years curriculum and drive them forward in an age appropriate way for our children, but without forcing too much academic expectation on them when they're simply not ready. We focus all of our teaching and learning around what we call a tailored provision approach, which means we're able to really tailor what we're delivering for each cohort of children that come through the school. And so we're able to make sure that they're never pushed, but they are stretched and challenged and excited to be learning. So ultimately it's a legal expectation, and we of course take pride in delivering that to the best of our standards, but we certainly see when we track the progress of our boys and our girls as they move through Surbiton High School, they're not at any disadvantage for starting that education formally at 4 and 5. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Mrs. Chong.
No, I think I do agree entirely. And when I was talking about the fine motor skills, that's exactly why we do lots of practical, lots of messy play, lots of therapy, lots of Play-Doh, lots of those opportunities to build those muscles, because you're right that often writing and the more formal aspects do not happen until they're about 6. But actually, which is entirely why we don't push them, as Miss Stewart was saying, and which is entirely why we don't want you to push them either. And we very much encourage them to have a go when they want to have a go. So often the first mark making that a child will make, her first piece of writing may well be outside on the playground with a piece of chalk, or it might be with a wet paintbrush on the patio. We try to encourage just as much use as possible. And I would also agree with Ms. Stewart. I know certainly in Hong Kong, you do K1 and K2 before you start, but actually you are expected in that K1 and K2 to do. Just excuse my Ferrari, obviously outside, just waiting to pass by. What they do expect in that K1 and K2 is probably what we expect in, so K2 would be very much what we would expect at reception. So it is just a nuance of age, but actually what you perhaps may well also have meant is this, which is a question that I have been asked just recently, I don't know if Ms. Stewart has, but about this delaying a start for a summer born, and we do get asked that sometimes. And what I quite often, I fight the corner because I'm an August baby, so I feel that it's my right to fight the corner. But actually, one of the things that I feel is quite important is that it's about assimilating them into the setting, and it may take a little bit longer for a child who's the youngest of 4, because they've not really done anything themselves. Their older siblings have done it. It might be that an August boy struggles perhaps with his social and emotional regulation, but it might be also a September girl that is really struggling with that. So actually don't already assume that something is a barrier for your child's development and for their learning moving forward, because it's not necessarily that way and it doesn't work that way.
Great, thank you. And just a question with regards to after school clubs, and this covers really the breakfast and after school clubs as well as co-curricular. Are they general play sessions, or are they specific sports or other learning activities that children can take part in?
They're an absolute mixture of all of those things, actually. So interestingly, I had a co-curricular conversation with the head of PE today to say, actually, is there a spread, a big enough spread of everything across the board? And he showed the list, and it was his way of saying yes, touche. Because there are Lego, there'll be a Lego Technics club, there'll be an animation club, there'll be a dance club. So some of those will be about skills acquisition and getting better at something. So they might be that, at cricket club, they're looking at cricket skills, but it actually might be an opportunity where they're just there to build something, or they're just there to enjoy creating something. It might be art and crafts club. So there's different focuses for different year groups and for different interests, really. And we hope that through the music department and the art department and all the teachers and all the teaching assistants provide a club. So there is a wide variety of opportunities out there for them. They could be busy every single day if you so wish them to be.
Great, thank you. And just a question with regards class sizes and teacher and pupil and teacher and teaching assistant ratios, what that kind of looks like, what kind of breakout groups do they fall into as well?
Well, I'll speak on statutory wise, the curriculum, the ratios for EYFS, as you probably will know, are quite high anyway. So we have a teacher and a teaching assistant in our Key Stage 1 year groups. We have the, in terms of class size, I am looking at, both of us look at 20 being at Key Stage 1, but I'm looking, mine are more between 15 and 20 at the moment. And I think Miss Stewart's are between 18 and 20 and 20 most years. So it just varies year on year too. But actually our sort of top mark on that is 20.
Great, thank you. And just a quick question with regards any books that you can recommend for children who are suffering with a bit of anxiety about starting school or a bit nervous about starting school. Is there anything that either of you can recommend?
There's lots of books out there, and actually I've probably got, if you leave your details, I've probably got a book list of some suggested. So if you get in touch with Mrs. Stockdale, she will be able to post your email across. But I've got a book list of things that you can present them with. You know what? Sometimes we look so deeply into this, and we expect that by talking to them about their anxieties that we're going to help, and sometimes it does, but actually sometimes what they need is just the fait accompli, and they just need you to say to them, it's okay, it's really cool, this is really exciting, look at your door in your school. Those sorts of things that actually may well help. We've got lots of books, and I'm very happy to give you those lists. One of the best ones that I've ever seen, in terms of, which is a bit cringy, but actually it was really good, was the Topsy and Tim. It's a TV program on their very first day at school, and it talks about one of the twins being a little bit nervous and the other one's okay, and buoys them up, and actually that's really useful. But I think Miss Stewart certainly said it a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about anxiety around starting school. It's really important that we drip feed that information to them. So, oh yeah, remember that after our holiday you're going to be at big school. Look how grown up you're going to be. And so you're dripping it into conversation as a completely normal event. I think Miss Stewart's got something to add to that.
What we can also do is we can certainly send out a reading list, but equally if Mrs. Chong shares that before next session on the 17th, then we can also add that on a slide as well, and talk around that a little bit more in our session about sort of managing that side of things pastorally. And also I've noticed being on the gate at the girls, several parents have now been past after our last meeting when we suggested that you just come past and say hello. I've been now introduced to a couple of girls who are starting in September. So again, if you live locally and you're able to do that, just pop past the boys prep at the start of the day or at the end of the day and just point out, you know, that could be your head teacher and that's where you're going to go in the playground, and just some of those sort of initiation activities at your pace and your child's pace will really, really help with that as well.
Great, thank you. And one final question just with regards to scholarships and I guess scholarship opportunities within the prep schools and scholarship opportunities as they leave the prep schools going forward.
So I can start with the girls and then hand over to Mrs. Chong. We obviously don't offer scholarships into the prep school. I think it would be incredibly difficult to identify children performing at that sort of level at the ages that we look at. What we do is obviously make sure that both the girls and the boys leave us at the end of year 6 with a plethora of opportunities in front of them. Often some of those are scholarships. So from a girls prep perspective, we are always really successful at gaining scholarships at the high school, academic, but also sport, music, drama, so many different ways for the children to shine. And indeed, some of them are successful in doing that in other schools too, but we are very proud of the sort of the number that we managed to get hold of in terms of transition up at the high school. And I know that Mrs. Chong's had a huge amount of success with that with the boys too.
Yeah. With the boys, it's again exactly the same as Ms. Stewart said, and we prepare them for whichever scholarship that they are applying for. What I would say is that the scholarship programme of old is not the scholarship programme at this stage. So, you know, you may well years ago have gone to King's Wimbledon on a 40% scholarship. And actually it was more about the financial aspect of that as well as the kudos. Interestingly, that isn't quite the same. Lots of independent schools now have needed to channel that money that was scholarship money actually into bursary funding. So that is less so, and so it is much more likely that it's a kind of 5% or a 6%, or, you know, it's much less than it ever was. So if you were ever banking on scholarships from that perspective, it is quite different these days. But actually what I love is when the children are just super enthused that they've got their music and sports scholarship to their chosen school, and they feel recognised and they realise that they're as excited as their music teacher or their art teacher at letting them fly in their chosen subject. So somebody who's particularly passionate about their subject and that shines through is always really lovely to see.
Great, thank you. That's the last question.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening. That was a very good idea about the book list. I'll make sure that Miss Stewart has that for her event next week, and we will both be here again in order to answer your questions. Have a lovely evening and thank you very much for joining us.